Hello and welcome to my first video on Rob Ward's really interesting guide to Macbeth. So you can find Rob Ward by just typing this into Google, and then you find his blog, which is called Rob Ward Resources. Flick through and you find this brilliant stuff, free stuff for English teachers. But why stop there? I think you should have it. So there are two brilliant guides that I've looked at so far, Jekyll and Hyde and Macbeth, and I'm going to show you in the course of loads of videos this term how you can use this yourself. Now the great thing is, if you simply click on that link, you can have the workbook that I'm showing you in this video. So big thanks to Rob Ward. He's posting this for free to help you do brilliantly in your GCSEs. Now, like lots of English teachers, he thinks of lots of different ways of trying to make the subject content relevant to your real life, to get you to think around the topic more generally. But I'm not really interested in that, sorry. I'm much more interested in how to get you to the A and the A star, or the levels 8 and 9 in the new exams. And luckily for me and for you, Rob Ward has had this genius idea of including other texts that will help you prepare for your English language exam, but that also will help you understand Macbeth. So you've got a double whammy of brilliance here, where I can teach you the skills of language and structure analysis that you'll need for paper 1 and paper 2, but also give you vocabulary and ideas to write about Macbeth. So thanks, Rob. Here we go. From The Guardian, does power lead to corruption? So there's a central question that you could say is directly relevant to Macbeth. If I look at the character of Macbeth himself, he becomes corrupt before he gets power. And so actually his corruption has a different route. So we might argue it's his participation in war. If you look at the description that the sergeant gives about him unseaming his enemy from the nave to the chops, you get a description of his extreme violence. But also, if you think about how that must have happened, he could only carry out that maneuver by inserting his sword directly into his opponent's stomach. So he would have been no more than 3 or 4 inches away from the man once his sword had been inserted. And then he drags the sword up. Macbeth himself would be covered in his victim's blood, probably his guts. It really is a hugely violent description and shows how Macbeth is immersed in violence. So actually, we could say his physical power and the power to take a life has led to his corruption, but we could also say that he's a victim of his profession, he's a warrior, or a victim of war. Or we might not see him as a victim at all. Is he in fact a psychopath who is naturally drawn to violence and therefore becomes a warrior? So that's an interesting perspective you might not have considered before, and it's been given to us simply by having a look at this Guardian article. Well, let's have a look at it from an English language point of view. Scientific research shows that whatever an individual's personality type, power leads to antisocial decisions. So immediately you can see that he starts with a fact in order to show that the rest of the article will be deeply plausible. We can't disagree with him because it's based on facts. So there's a little trick there. He's also showing off his vocabulary. So we have an individual rather than a person. We've got antisocial decisions rather than poor behaviour. And then we've got the focus of the text, which is testosterone. And I'm going to ask you to consider the role that testosterone plays in Macbeth's actions. So let's have a look. A few years ago, after a debate over the presidential elections in the USA, journalists and I began to discuss the case of the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. So this is what I teach in a Mad Father's Crotch. This is an anecdote, a little mini story that serves to help persuade. The journalist wanted me to explain why Berlusconi was so power hungry So here you've got emotive language, which is the E of Mad Father's Crotch. What factors might explain his character and his sexual escapades? Here again you have emotive language. I did not want to answer. So here an emotive sentence. Many writers you'll find start their paragraph with short sentences in order to get an emotional response from you. And then here we have another one. It was too big a question, another emotional response demanded. And then much longer and more complex sentences to develop an argument. However, after persistent questioning, I blurted out a response. So here we have emotive language, and this affects the tone of the writer. He's trying to make us feel sorry for him, but also critical of him. He's critical of himself here with hindsight. I don't know, maybe it's because of his testosterone. So he's introducing the possibility that testosterone is a reason why a prime minister might become power hungry, but he's also questioning how reasonable an idea that is. It sounds slightly ludicrous to him, and that's conveyed through the word blurted. Now he resorts to facts to give us an alternative perspective. We know that the hormone testosterone indicates reduced empathy and increased antisocial behaviour. So here you've got a string of facts, very formal language and vocabulary, and you're going to be able to talk about reduced empathy when you talk about Macbeth. He stops empathizing with the people he's going to kill. Look at what he does to Macduff's family. He slaughters them for no reason. Macduff's not even there. So completely reduced empathy. Similarly, he has reduced empathy for Lady Macbeth. Once she starts to question his authority, you remember the banquet scene where she has to take over, and she accuses him of being a coward, seeing ghosts which aren't there. He completely cuts her off. In fact, he cuts her off before that. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, he said, when he's about to have Banquo killed. On the one hand, you might say that's increased empathy. He wants to spare her the full horror of what he's doing. But on the other hand, he's completely cutting her out from the marriage. And if we analyse his language more closely, you might remember that they sleep separately. She comments, Lady Macbeth, on how little he's sleeping. And then we know that they must be sleeping separately because of the sleepwalking scene. Macbeth is not present when Lady Macbeth sleepwalks. She obviously doesn't wake him up when she gets out of bed. So this all points to his reduced empathy in the play. So as well as controlling sexual behaviour. So this is quite interesting. It's very easy to play that initial seduction where Lady Macbeth tries to persuade Macbeth to kill in a highly sexual manner. So his heightened testosterone that would have been produced in battle, and that also is a scientific fact, leads to that sexual language between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth at the beginning of the play. But once his mind becomes unhinged by the violence of murdering his own king and then his friend Banquo, he seems to lose all sexual appetite. And husband and wife, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, are apart. Now, what's great about this is I might not have thought about any of that until I started to ask myself, how does this article change the way I think about Macbeth? And as soon as you do that, as soon as you start looking at Macbeth from another perspective, you're automatically forced into A&A star territory. And that's why it's so useful. Okay, so let's go back to it as a language study. So when planning a study on corrupt leaders with my colleagues, I thought it might be interesting to measure testosterone too. Does power corrupt? Now that's not quite a rhetorical question, but it does show us that in informative writing, you'll often use headings. Look, here's another one down here. So there's a tip for you for the exam. If in paper 2, question 5 might ask you about writing to inform, might ask you to inform in your writing. Answering this question is not easy. Notice again how he starts with a short sentence. It is possible that power corrupts, but it is also possible that some individuals seek power because they're already corrupt at heart. So here we have a metaphor. We can't actually be corrupt at heart. We've got a much more complex sentence which has a contrasting pair in it. One, power corrupts, but on the other hand, the contrast is it's not power, it's what's inside us, it's our hearts, our instincts. So there's an example of a contrasting pair. We were therefore interested to see if stable qualities that we could measure, such as personality, for example honesty, or physical factors such as testosterone levels, mattered for corruption. So you can see how writers add extra information using brackets. That's a skill to improving the complexity of your ideas, but it's also a skill where you simply want to show off your use of punctuation. So extra information, add it in using brackets. To know whether power does corrupt, we had to manipulate power. And here's another word that you can talk about when you talk about Macbeth. Who manipulates who here? So an A-star answer might look at the relationship between Macbeth and his wife. Let's think about the letter. Why does Macbeth write that letter? So one reason might be, well, Shakespeare does it as a dramatic device because he needs Lady Macbeth to know already that Macbeth has met the witches, so she can form this plan. So he just puts it in as a dramatic device. We know it's a dramatic device because it's completely implausible. You know, Macbeth rides on his horse as quickly as he can, but somehow this letter has already arrived by messenger. You know, how would that happen? There are no helicopters. So the very fact that it exists might suggest that it's there to show how manipulative Lady Macbeth is. And many readers decide that Lady Macbeth is the tipping point. She's the catalyst, if you like, that forces Macbeth to kill Duncan. We've got all these speeches where he talks about how he'll be damned if he does it. There are so many reasons not to do it. The angels will trumpet-tongued call out against his sin. He's related to Duncan. He certainly shouldn't kill him. But let's look at it from another point of view. What if he deliberately sends the letter in order to manipulate her? He knows his wife intimately, and he knows that Lady Macbeth will come up with a plan. And this gives him a psychological excuse. It's not really himself who's deciding to kill Duncan, because that would be too awful for him to contemplate. It's actually himself manipulated by his wife. In other words, this is a narrative, he tells himself, so that he can allow himself to have an excuse. This is the same sort of excuse that I see all the time in class, where students might not try hard and then they have an excuse for doing badly. Oh, well, if I'd tried hard, I would have done really well. If I'd revised, I would have done really well in the exam. I didn't do well because, well, I didn't try. And that's a kind of manipulative story that we tell ourselves. So Macbeth's letter could be that. It's up to you to decide, but now you have this language, manipulate, manipulative manipulation that you can use in your A and A star answer when you're writing about Macbeth. Okay, let's have a look at some more. We gave power to a random group of participants and observed how they behaved. We ensured we had roughly equal measures of similar individuals, honest, smart, corrupt men, women, etc., in our groups. We set up 2 experiments. Again, notice the really short sentence to begin the paragraph. Participants played what is called a dictator game. The dictator, referred to as the leader in the experiment. So here we have an added bit of information, and the writer has decided to put this in parenthesis, but here the parentheses are commas because the information is dropped into the sentence, whereas before the parenthesis was brackets. They're interchangeable actually, and this writer is thinking, well, you're getting a bit bored of brackets. I've used them twice now, 4 times actually if you count them. I'll go for commas this time. And that's a neat little trick that you can do to impress the examiner in your own writing. So they had to make choices between serving the greater good. So here this is entirely metaphor. All right, it is a cliche, something we've heard many times before. But we can use that to contrast it with Macbeth. Macbeth has no interest in becoming king for the greater good. He doesn't think he'll be any better a leader than Macduff. And actually, if you look at the descriptions that he has of Macduff before he kills him, it's very clear that he thinks Macduff is a better leader in terms of the goodness that he provides, but he's going to kill him anyway. Doing what's right for public welfare by increasing the team's payout, or serving oneself by increasing their own payout but destroying public welfare. So here again you've got the contrasting pair, increasing the team's payout or increasing their own payout. And sophisticated sentence often balance on two alternatives like that. We also manipulated the number of followers for each leader. The leaders either had one follower, low power leaders, or several, high power leaders. We then allowed the leaders to take decisions about payouts. What did we find? In the first experiment, results showed that higher power leaders took antisocial decisions. So that's interesting. If we look at Macbeth now, we can see that one of the reasons that he takes this decision to kill Duncan is that he sees himself as a high power leader. And that leadership is only conferred by war. So we can infer from this, perhaps, that had there been no war with Norway, Macbeth would not have become corrupt and would not have decided to kill the king. So Shakespeare could be making a wider point, not that power corrupts, but that warfare corrupts. And we could therefore ask, is Macbeth a pacifist play? Is it actually an argument against war? I mean, that's quite a difficult argument to consider because the war is the invasion of an invader, and the Norwegians have taken over. So probably Shakespeare, like his contemporaries, would think no war is necessary, but an unintended consequence is that war therefore breeds leaders who are violent and antisocial. Interesting, isn't it? Before becoming leaders or followers, we asked participants to vote on what a responsible leader should do with their payouts. Most endorsed the more social option. Just 3.33% said that leaders should take antisocial decisions. Yet when they became leaders, participants succumbed to the corruptive effect of power. So let's have a look at that. Brilliant vocabulary that we can use. Macbeth succumbed to the corruptive effects of what? Well, it could be his ambition. So he becomes a killer simply because he wants to become king. Or you might argue it's the corruptive effects of Lady Macbeth's ambition, and he does it in order to please his wife. Then you have the added detail of how she's just lost her child, which puts him in a position of trying to assuage and compensate for her grief. So it could be her. Or you might argue that he succumbed to the corruptive effects of the witches and the belief in the supernatural. So that vocabulary you can use whatever your opinion is about Macbeth. And look how emotive succumbed is. It means to give into, and there's something cowardly about that word as well. And that reminds us of Lady Macbeth's comment to Macbeth, "I shame to wear a heart so white," white the symbol of surrender, which has particular relevance to a soldier. She's accusing him of giving in and surrendering his pride, his bravery, his warrior status. So you can certainly argue that Lady Macbeth is the corruptive effect on him, if you like. So, interestingly, even the most honest individuals in time slid down the slippery, corrupting slope of power. Here we've got a lovely bit of a metaphor here. Included in the metaphor is the alliteration. Many students think that the alliterative words need to be right next door to each other, but that's not the case. And so this alliteration emphasizes how difficult it is for even honest individuals to behave honestly. They become corrupted, and then the corrupting slope of power, you also have the alliteration, the consonants of the P's. Whoops, let's cancel that. So slippery, corrupting, slope, power. You can see the P's repeating there. Those plosive notes which kind of indicate the writer's contempt for people who are succumbing to this sort of corruption. Even more interesting was our observation that those who had high levels of testosterone were most corrupt when they had high power. Well, that's directly relevant to Macbeth. His testosterone would have been very elevated through the battle. Lots of that hormone would have been released just in the fight. But we could also say that that raised and heightened testosterone level is probably there all the time, which is why he is such a successful warrior and leader. So that's another interesting perspective. Is Macbeth saying that this kind of corruption is essentially testosterone produced and therefore much more likely to be male? Okay, well, let's look at what happens in the play. When Lady Macbeth decides that she too desires power and wishes to corrupt Macbeth, what does she do? Unsex me here. You know, she asks to have her sex changed to become male. So you could argue that Shakespeare is clearly indicating that this level of evil is actually a male trait. It's a problem of being male. And you could argue that Lady Macbeth proves that it's also a female trait, but you could also argue the opposite, because her very language, come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. She's making a direct link between cruelty and masculinity, and Shakespeare could actually agree with her view. So our findings have important implication for the design of institutions. Leaders prefer to have power to make their own decisions and lots of discretion. So notice that even though this writing is to inform, it's not trying to persuade you or anything, the writer still uses a lot of alliteration: prefer and power, decisions, discretion. It's interesting, isn't it, that those techniques work across all the kind of writing styles. Yet we know from our study, and others too, that power can go to leaders' heads. And so he ends with a metaphor. It's not the best one because it's a cliche. We've heard it many times before. But hopefully that's helped you really understand Macbeth, understand his wife, the relationship between the two. The kinds of discussion that I've given you will lead you to get an A star. Rob Ward wants you to be able to use the word succumb successfully. I showed you 3 ways to do that. But of course we also had this idea of manipulation that he also introduced us to, the idea of corruption and reduced empathy. So there's a lot of vocabulary you can use, and you can have this interesting discussion about testosterone. Not a long one, because Shakespeare doesn't allude to it, but if you link it to Macbeth's warrior status and his desire for power, and also what Shakespeare might be saying about masculinity, particularly with the change in Lady Macbeth's sex, which doesn't literally change sex, but she asks to, then you're well into the A and A star. So, hopefully I've persuaded you that this guide that you've got here is a good one to download. And further, I've persuaded you that looking at other texts is a brilliant idea, because not only do you get better at the English language paper, it gives you a different perspective on the play. If you liked this, I'm going to make many more videos like it. Big thank you again to Rob Ward. Do subscribe if you want more. Good luck with your revision.